The metal chair scraped against the floor as Zektar shifted his weight. His forearms hung at his sides, two of them ending in bandaged stumps where his claws used to be. The bright lights overhead made his green scales look pale and sickly. He had been sitting in this white room for 3 hours waiting. Commander Velnoth walked through the door carrying a thick file. The tall, blue-skinned officer sat down across from Zektar and placed the file on the table between them. The room was cold and empty except for 2 chairs and the table. A small recording device sat in the center, its red light blinking. "State your name and rank for the record," Velnoth said in his calm voice. "Zektar of the Crimson Claw clan, former sergeant, Coalition Marine Corps, 3rd Assault Division." Zektar's voice was rough, like stones grinding together. Velnoth opened the file and looked at the papers inside. "Impressive record, Sergeant. 12 major campaigns across the galaxy. You fought on Rigel Prime, survived the siege of New Arcturus, led the charge on the crystal mines of Vega 7, never retreated from battle, received the Iron Star for bravery, the Silver Talon for leadership, and the Blood Cross for sacrifice above duty." Zektar said nothing. His yellow eyes stared at the table. "You were considered one of our best soldiers," Velnoth continued. "Unit. Commanders specifically requested you for the hardest missions. Your troops would follow you anywhere. Then came the Earth campaign." At the mention of Earth, Zektar's remaining claws dug into his palms. Small drops of purple blood appeared on the table. "That's why you're here, Sergeant. High Command needs to understand what happened out there. How did the Coalition lose a war against a species that had barely learned to travel between stars? How did primitives defeat the greatest military force in the galaxy?" Zektar looked up at Velnoth. His eyes were tired and old, though he was only 37 cycles old. "You want to know about the humans?" "Yes." "You want to know why half my unit is dead and the other half is in mental hospitals?" "Yes." Zektar leaned back in his chair. "Then, you better get more recording devices. This is going to take a while." Velnoth pressed a button on his communicator. "Bring in extra recording equipment and some water for the sergeant." He looked back at Zektar. "Start from the beginning. Tell me about first contact with Earth." Zektar closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they seemed to be looking at something far away. It was supposed to be easy. Just another primitive world to add to the Coalition. The humans had only just figured out how to build faster-than-light ships. Their weapons were basic, their ships were small, their military was scattered across their planet with no central command. "What made you think it would be easy?" "Our intelligence report said they were peaceful. They spent most of their resources on art and music and stories. They had something called the United Nations that tried to solve problems by talking instead of fighting. We thought they were soft." Velnoth made notes on his datapad. "When did you first realize you were wrong?" Zektar's laugh was bitter and short. "The first battle. We sent 3 destroyer squadrons to their moon to set up a base. Simple operation. Land, build, send a message to Earth telling them they were now part of the Coalition. Should have taken 6 hours. What happened, Captain?" "Lisa Hayes happened." Zektar stood up and walked to the wall. He pressed his forehead against the cold metal. "She was commanding a small human patrol ship. Old design. Probably built 20 years before the war. Her ship was smaller than one of our landing shuttles. She should have run when she saw our destroyers, but she didn't run. No, she attacked." Zektar turned around to face Velnoth. "A single human ship attacked 3 Coalition destroyers. We laughed at first. Our gunners couldn't even get a target lock because her ship was so small and moving so fast. Then what? Then she started ramming us." Velnoth looked up from his notes. "Ramming. She used her ship like a weapon, crashed it into our engines, our weapon systems, our communication arrays. Every time we thought we had destroyed her ship, she would appear somewhere else, hitting us again. Her ship was falling apart, pieces of metal flying off with every impact, but she kept attacking." Zektar sat back down. His hands were shaking. "Now. We finally cornered her ship near the dark side of the moon. Her engines were dead, her weapons were gone, her life support was failing. We sent a message demanding her surrender." "Did she surrender?" She laughed. Zektar's voice was barely a whisper. She laughed and said something I'll never forget. She said, "Welcome to Earth, you ugly bastards. Hope you brought enough body bags." Then what happened? Then she detonated her ship's reactor. Zektar's voice got louder. She turned her own ship into a bomb and took out the destroyer Claw of Victory. 3,000 Coalition soldiers died because one human refused to surrender. Velnoth wrote quickly on his pad. That was unusual behavior for a military officer. That's what we thought too. We figured she was crazy, maybe damaged in the head from battle stress, but then we intercepted human communications. Do you know what they called her? No. A hero. They made songs about her. They named schools after her. They told their children stories about the brave captain who died fighting monsters from space. She became famous across their entire planet in less than a day. Velnoth frowned. They celebrated her death? They celebrated her sacrifice. And that's when I started to understand that we weren't fighting a normal species. Zektar leaned forward. Most species in the galaxy fight to live. Humans fight to win. There's a difference. Explain. When a Rigelian soldier is surrounded, he surrenders because he wants to go home to his family. When a Centauri warrior is outgunned, she retreats because she knows she can fight another day. When a human is trapped with no way out, he looks for the best way to hurt you before he dies. Velnoth set down his pen. That seems inefficient. That's what we thought. Our war college teaches that the goal of combat is to achieve objectives, with minimum casualties. Preserve your forces, control territory, negotiate from a position of strength. Basic military doctrine used by every civilized species in the galaxy. But humans are different. Humans don't care about minimum casualties if the casualties are their own. They care about maximum damage to the enemy. Captain Hayes could have surrendered and been treated well as a prisoner. Instead, she chose to die and take 3,000 of our soldiers with her. From a tactical standpoint, it made no sense. But it worked. It worked better than any conventional tactic could have. News of her attack spread through the human communication networks. Every human in their solar system knew that one of their captains had killed 3,000 Coalition soldiers before dying. It changed everything. Zektar stood up again and began pacing around the small room. Suddenly, human ships stopped running from our fleets. They started attacking instead, not trying to win, just trying to hurt us as much as possible before they died. Our casualty reports went from dozens per battle to thousands. High Command must have been concerned. High Command was furious. They sent more ships, bigger guns, better armor. It didn't matter, the humans kept fighting the same way. Ramming attacks, suicide runs, booby-trapped wreckage. Every human ship that died took Coalition vessels with it. Velnoth looked at his notes. When did you realize this wasn't just space combat tactics? When did you understand it was something deeper? Zektar stopped pacing and looked directly at the commander. When we landed on Earth and met the ground forces, when I saw what humans do when they're fighting for their home planet. We'll get to the ground war in the next session. For now, I need to understand the space battles. How many ships did the Coalition lose in the first month? 47 major vessels. 12 destroyers, 8 cruisers, 3 dreadnoughts, and 24 support ships. We lost more ships in the first month fighting humans than we lost in the previous 5 years fighting everyone else combined. And human losses? Nearly their entire fleet, maybe 200 ships total. Most of them converted civilian vessels with weapons bolted on. They should have been target practice for our gunners. But they weren't. No, they weren't. Zektar sat down heavily. Every human ship fought like Captain Hayes. Every single one. They turned their cargo holds into bombs, their passenger compartments into missile tubes, their life support systems into chemical weapons. They fought like every battle was their last battle, because for many of them it was. That's just it, Commander. They knew they were going to die. They planned on dying. They made videos for their families before each battle, said goodbye to their children, wrote letters to be delivered after their deaths. But they still fought. Velnoth closed the file. We'll continue tomorrow, Sergeant. Get some rest. Zektar shook his head. I don't rest anymore, sir. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them singing. Singing. Human battle songs they would sing while they died, even as their ships broke apart. Even as the vacuum of space pulled them into the dark, they would sing on their communication channels. Songs about their planet, their families, their determination to make us pay for every mile of space we took. Zektar walked toward the door, then stopped. "Commander, do you know why I requested this debriefing?" Standard procedure after major campaigns. Commander Velnoth entered the interrogation room carrying 2 cups of hot tea. He placed one in front of Zektar and sat down with the other. The recording device was already running, its red light steady and bright. "You mentioned ground forces yesterday," Velnoth said. "Tell me about the invasion of Earth itself." Zektar wrapped his remaining claws around the warm cup. Steam rose from the dark liquid, but he didn't drink. High Command was angry about the ship losses. They decided to bypass the human fleet and attack the planet directly. Fast strike, capture the major cities, force a surrender. Standard invasion doctrine. How many troops did the coalition commit? 2 million soldiers from 12 different species, the largest invasion force in coalition history. We had enough firepower to level a continent. Zektar finally took a sip of tea. General Krixtal was in command. He had conquered 47 worlds without losing a single major battle. "Where did you land?" "Multiple locations across the planet. I was with the 7th Strike Force, assigned to a place the humans call the American Midwest. Intelligence said it was farmland, mostly empty, populated by people who grew food for the cities. Should have been the easiest target." Velnoth made notes. But it wasn't easy. Nothing about fighting humans was ever easy. Zektar set down his cup. "We landed in something called Nebraska. Wide open spaces, small towns, scattered farms. Perfect landing zone for our heavy equipment. No major military bases, no fortifications, no apparent defenses. What went wrong?" "Everything." Zektar stood up and walked to the wall. "The first sign of trouble came when our scouts reported that the farms were empty. No humans, no animals, no vehicles, just empty buildings and empty fields. They had evacuated?" "That's what we thought. General Krixtal ordered us to secure the area and establish a forward base. We moved in with full confidence, expecting to set up operations and then push toward the cities." Zektar turned to face Velnoth. "The attacks started 3 hours after. We landed. Small groups of humans, maybe 5 or 6 at a time, hitting our supply convoys and disappearing. They used weapons we had never seen before, things that looked like farm equipment but fired explosive rounds." "Improvised weapons?" "Improvised. Everything. They turned their farming machines into tanks, their grain silos into artillery positions, their underground storage areas into bunkers. Every innocent-looking building was a fortress." Velnoth looked up from his notes. "How organized were they?" "More organized than any military force we had ever faced. They had communication networks hidden in their farming equipment. They had supply caches buried in their fields. They had mapped every road, every hill, every building for maximum defensive advantage." Zektar began pacing again. "But the worst part wasn't their preparation. It was their attitude. These weren't soldiers, Commander. They were farmers and shopkeepers and teachers. Civilians who had never seen combat before the war started. Yet they fought like veterans. Better than veterans. Veterans have learned to be careful, to preserve their lives so they can fight another day. These humans fought like they had nothing to lose." "Tell me about a specific engagement." Zektar stopped pacing and sat down. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "There was a town called Milfield. Population maybe 3,000 humans. We surrounded it with 2 full battalions, 8,000 coalition soldiers. Standard procedure was to demand surrender, then occupy the town and use it as a base. Did they surrender? They laughed at us. Broadcast our surrender demand on their local communication network so everyone could hear it. Then they sent back their own message. What did they say? Come and take it." Zektar's voice was barely audible. 3,000 humans telling 8,000 coalition soldiers to come and take their town. Velnoth wrote quickly. "What happened next?" "We attacked at dawn. Full assault, air support, artillery bombardment. The works? Should have been over. In an hour." Zektar took another sip of tea. 6 days later, we finally took the town. Do you know what our casualties were? Tell me. 4,000 dead, 3,000 wounded. We lost half our force taking a town from farmers and storekeepers. Velnoth looked up sharply. Half your force? The humans had turned every building into a fighting position. Every street was a kill zone. Every basement was a bunker. They had booby-trapped everything, from doors to chairs to children's toys. Zektar's voice got stronger as he continued. But the tactics weren't the worst part. The worst part was that they enjoyed it. They would taunt us over their communication channels, joking about how many coalition soldiers they had killed that day. They made bets about which of our officers would die next. That seems unnecessarily cruel. Cruel? Zektar laughed bitterly. Commander, let me tell you about Sergeant Ben Carter. Who was he? Human squad leader, maybe 25 years old. He was defending a factory in something called Detroit, industrial city, lots of manufacturing plants. We needed to capture it to cut off human weapons production. Zektar leaned forward. Carter's squad was trapped in a building surrounded by 2 companies of coalition soldiers. 300 of our troops against 12 humans. We had them completely cut off, no escape routes, no reinforcements coming. Standard surrender situation. That's what we thought. We sent in negotiators, offered them good treatment as prisoners of war. Carter's response was to shoot our negotiator in the head and send back his helmet with a message painted on it. What did the message say? Detroit stands. Come get some. Zektar's claws scraped against the table, so we tried to take the building. Frontal assault. Maximum force. And Carter's squad held us off for 6 days. 12 humans against 300 coalition soldiers, and they held us off for 6 days. Zektar's voice was rising. They had turned the building into a maze of traps and ambush points. Every room was a battlefield. Every doorway could hide death. How did they have enough ammunition? They didn't. By the 3rd day, they were using our own weapons against us. Every coalition soldier they killed, they took his rifle, his grenades, his equipment. They were better supplied at the end of the battle than at the beginning. Velnoth was writing frantically. How did it end? We finally cornered Carter on the top floor. He was alone. His squad was dead. He was wounded and bleeding. We had him trapped in a room with no windows, no escape. 50 coalition soldiers, pointing weapons at him. He surrendered? He smiled. Zektar's voice was a whisper now. He looked at 50 armed soldiers and smiled. Then he said something I'll never forget. What? He said, thanks for bunching up. This is going to be fun. Zektar covered his face with his hands. Then he detonated the explosives he had strapped to his body. He killed himself. He killed himself and 37 coalition soldiers. He had turned himself into a weapon. Zektar looked up at Velnoth. Do you understand what that means, Commander? He planned to die. He wanted to die, as long as he could take as many of us with him as possible. That's not rational behavior. Rational? Zektar stood up again. Nothing about humans was rational. After Carter died, other human units started doing the same thing. Suicide attacks became standard human tactics. They would strap explosives to their bodies and run into our formations. They would booby-trap their own wounded soldiers. They would surrender just to get close enough to detonate hidden weapons. How did your troops react? Poorly. Very poorly. Zektar walked to the corner of the room. Coalition soldiers are trained to fight enemies who want to live. We're taught to use the enemy's survival instinct against them, cut off their retreat, threaten their supply lines, make them fear death. But humans didn't fear death. Humans embraced death. They turned it into a weapon. Our soldiers started refusing orders to advance. They would rather face court-martial than face another human unit that was ready to die. Velnoth set down his 10. Tell me about the psychological impact. We started losing soldiers to mental breakdown, not battle wounds, not physical injuries, mental collapse. Zektar returned to his chair. They would find coalition soldiers sitting in corners, staring at nothing, refusing to eat or speak. The medical corps called it human syndrome. Human syndrome? The psychological condition that developed when coalition soldiers spent too much time fighting humans. Symptoms included paranoia, inability to sleep, and complete loss of will to fight. Zektar drank more tea. At first, Command thought it was cowardice. They court-martialed several soldiers for refusing to fight. What changed their minds? When it started happening to officers. War leader Gorthmal, one of our most decorated commanders, was found in his quarters 3 days after a raid on a human position. He was curled in a ball under his bed, whimpering about children's drawings. Children's drawings? The humans had evacuated a school, but they left the children's artwork on the walls. Pictures of families, pets, birthday parties, normal things that children draw. Zektar's voice got quieter. But they also left new drawings. Pictures of coalition soldiers with targets painted on them. Pictures of human families standing over dead aliens. Pictures of spaceships burning in the sky. Children drew those? 6- and 7-year-old humans. They drew pictures of killing coalition soldiers like other children might draw pictures of flowers or animals. Zektar set down his cup with shaking hands. The interrogation room felt colder today. Commander Velnoth had arrived early and was reviewing his notes when Zektar entered. The alien veteran looked worse than before. His scales had lost more color, and dark circles surrounded his yellow eyes. "Sit down, Sergeant," Velnoth said softly. "Are you ready to continue?" Zektar took his usual chair and stared at the table. "I dreamed about them again last night. The children. They were singing that song." "What song?" "You'll understand when I tell you about New Geneva." Zektar's voice was flat and emotionless. It was a human colony world about 40 light-years from Earth. Agricultural settlement, maybe 50,000 people total. Families mostly, people who had left Earth to start farms on a new world. Velnoth activated the recording device. "When did the Coalition attack New Geneva?" "3rd month of the war. High Command thought it would be easy. Cut off from Earth, no military installations, mostly civilians. We sent 1 division, about 12,000 troops. Who was in command?" "General Thaxmore. Good officer, experienced in colony suppression. He had taken 17 worlds without major casualties." Zektar finally looked up. He expected to land, accept surrender and establish a base for further operations in human space. But that's not what happened. The humans had been preparing. Zektar's claws drummed against the table. They knew we were coming. Every family had been organized into resistance cells. Every farm had been turned into a fortress. Every child had been trained to fight. Velnoth stopped writing. "Children? How young?" "The youngest fighter we captured was 8 years old. Her name was Katie Walsh. She was carrying homemade explosives in her school backpack." Zektar's voice cracked. 8 years old, Commander. She barely came up to my waist." "What happened to her?" "She tried to blow up our command post. Would have succeeded too, if one of our scanners hadn't detected the explosives." Zektar leaned back in his chair. "When we disarmed the device, she started crying. Not because she was caught, but because she had failed to kill us." Velnoth set down his pen. "How were human children involved in combat operations?" "They weren't just involved. They were leading operations. The resistance on New Geneva was organized by Colonel Susan Baker, former Earth military. But the actual fighting was done by family units. Parents, children, grandparents, all working together." "Explain." "Human children are small and fast. They could move through air vents, crawl under buildings, hide in places adult soldiers couldn't reach. Baker turned them into scouts, messengers, and saboteurs." Zektar stood up and began his usual pacing. But they weren't just following orders. These children volunteered for missions. They competed with each other to see who could kill the most. Coalition soldiers. That's not normal behavior for young beings. Nothing about human young is normal. Zektar stopped pacing and faced Velnoth. "Most species protect their children, keep them away from danger. Humans turned their children into weapons. Tell me about a specific incident." Zektar was quiet. For a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. There was a boy named Danny Walsh, 14 years old, Katie's older brother. He led a squad of 12 children, ages 9 to 16. A child leading other children in combat? Danny had been trained by his father, who was a human military instructor before the colonies were attacked. The boy knew tactics, weapons, explosives. He could plan operations better than some coalition officers. Velnoth leaned forward. What did his squad do? They specialized in infiltration and sabotage. They would sneak into our bases at night, plant explosives, steal weapons, gather intelligence. In 3 weeks, Danny's squad was responsible for destroying 6 coalition vehicles, killing 23 soldiers, and stealing enough weapons to arm 50 adult fighters. How did you finally catch them? We didn't catch them. We cornered them. Zektar's hands were shaking again. Intelligence located their hideout in an old grain storage facility. We surrounded the building with 2 companies, 300 soldiers. We had them completely trapped. Did you offer them surrender? General Thaxmore tried. He sent a message offering safe treatment if they gave up. The children's response was broadcast on every human communication channel on the planet. What did they say? Danny Walsh spoke for the group. He said, "We are the children of New Geneva. We do not surrender to monsters. Come and take us if you can." Zektar sat down heavily. Then they started singing. Singing? A human song called Amazing Grace. 12 children's voices, harmonizing perfectly, broadcast across the entire planet. Every human on New Geneva could hear those children singing while surrounded by coalition soldiers, Velnoth wrote quickly. What effect did this have? It changed everything. Human resistance fighters across the planet heard those children singing and realized they weren't alone. Attacks on coalition positions tripled that night. What happened to Danny's squad? Zektar covered his face with his hands. We stormed the building. Full assault, maximum force. We found the children on the top floor armed with stolen coalition weapons and homemade explosives. Did they fight? They fought like veteran soldiers. These children, the oldest was 16, held off 300 coalition troops for 4 hours. They used the building's layout perfectly, set up crossfires and ambush points, coordinated their attacks. How did it end? We finally broke through their defenses. Found Danny and 3 other children in the last room, surrounded, out of ammunition, wounded and bleeding. Zektar looked up at Velnoth. Danny was holding a device in his hands, some kind of transmitter. What did he do with it? He looked at our soldiers, smiled, and said, "Tell the galaxy that the children of Earth do not bow to tyrants." Then he activated the device. What happened? The entire building exploded. Danny had rigged the structure with explosives before. We attacked. He waited until we were all inside, then brought the whole thing down on top of us. Zektar's voice was getting louder. 57 coalition soldiers died in that explosion, killed by children who chose death over surrender. Velnoth was writing frantically. How did the other humans react? They made Danny Walsh a hero, named him the Little General of New Geneva. Human children across the galaxy started calling themselves Danny's kids and volunteering for suicide missions. The psychological impact on your troops? Devastating. Coalition soldiers had been trained to fight adults, not children. When a child attacks you with explosives, when children are shooting at you from school windows, when you find drawings of dead coalition soldiers made by 6-year-olds, it breaks something in your mind. Zektar stood up again. My squad mate, Medic Thralvar, was assigned to treat wounded human children. Standard procedure, we were supposed to provide medical care to enemy casualties. What happened to him? The first child he treated was a 10-year-old girl with shrapnel wounds. While he was bandaging her injuries, she looked up at him and said, "When I get better, I'm going to kill you and all your friends." A child threatening a medic? She wasn't threatening. She was promising. Thralvar realized she meant every word. This injured child was already planning how to kill the person who was saving her life. Velnoth looked up from his notes. How did Thralvar respond? He finished treating her wounds, then walked outside and started screaming. Wouldn't stop for 3 hours. When he finally calmed down, he couldn't speak for 2 days. The medical corps said he was suffering from severe trauma. What kind of trauma? He kept saying, they made their children into monsters. What kind of species does that to their own young? Zektar's voice cracked. But that's not the worst part, Commander. What's the worst part? The worst part is that the children weren't monsters. They were just human children, doing what their parents and teachers had told them to do, fighting for their homes, protecting their families, defending their world. Zektar walked to the wall and pressed his forehead against the cold metal. We realized that humans had done something no other species in the galaxy had ever done. They had turned their entire population into soldiers. Not just the adults, not just the military, but everyone. Children, elderly, disabled, everyone. How organized was this effort? Completely organized. Every human settlement had schools that taught children to fight. Every family had emergency plans that included combat roles for everyone. Every child over the age of 6 knew how to use weapons, make explosives, and conduct guerrilla warfare. The Coalition had no experience with this. No species in the galaxy makes soldiers out of their children. It's considered barbaric, uncivilized, but humans didn't care about civilization when their worlds were being attacked. Velnoth closed his notebook. How did this affect Coalition strategy? It made conquest impossible. You can't control a population when every child is a potential assassin. You can't establish safe zones when schools are weapons factories. You can't trust civilians when 8-year-olds are carrying bombs. Zektar turned around. But the psychological impact was worse than the tactical problems. Coalition soldiers started refusing to patrol human settlements. They couldn't handle the stress of knowing that any child they saw might try to kill them. 60% of ground forces were classified as combat ineffective within 2 months of the new Geneva operation. Not from battle injuries, from mental trauma caused by fighting children. Commander Velnoth found Zektar already sitting in the interrogation room when he arrived. The alien veteran was hunched over the table, staring at his hands. Dark purple blood stained the metal surface where his claws had scratched deep grooves. "Sergeant, are you all right?" Velnoth asked as he sat down. "I remembered something last night. Something I had tried to forget." Zektar's voice was hollow. "About the day we realized the war was lost," Velnoth activated the recording device. "Tell me about it." "High Command decided to end the war quickly. The ground battles were going badly, our soldiers were breaking down, and human resistance was spreading to other worlds. So they planned something called Operation Final Strike. What was Operation Final Strike? Simultaneous orbital bombardment of Earth's major population centers: New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow, and 12 other cities. The plan was to kill 50 million humans in one day and force immediate surrender. Velnoth wrote quickly. A terror bombing campaign. More than that. It was designed to break human morale completely, show them that resistance was useless, that the Coalition could kill their civilians whenever we wanted. Zektar looked up with tired eyes. High Command thought that losing their biggest cities would make the humans give up, but the humans had other plans. The humans had Admiral Pete Collins. Zektar's claws scraped against the table again. He was their naval commander in the Pacific region. For the first year of the war, he had been studying our tactics, learning how we fought, finding our weaknesses. What did he discover? He discovered that Coalition forces were not prepared for total warfare. We expected enemies to fight according to rules, to preserve their civilian populations, to seek negotiated settlements when facing overwhelming force. Zektar stood up and began pacing. Collins realized that humans could win by refusing to follow any rules at all, by making every battle cost more than the Coalition was willing to pay. How did he implement this strategy? He turned Earth's oceans into a graveyard. Collins had hundreds of human submarines, most of them volunteers. On one-way missions, they began hunting Coalition ships with tactics that defied every principle of naval warfare. Explain. Traditional submarine warfare involves stealth attacks, hit-and-run tactics, preserving your vessel for future operations. Collins threw all of that away. His submarines were instructed to ram coalition ships underwater, to use their hulls as weapons to sacrifice themselves for maximum damage. Velnoth looked up from his notes. Suicide attacks at sea? Captain Rick Stone was typical of Collins's submarine commanders. His boat was called the USS Portland, an old attack submarine with a crew of 90 humans. Stone had been a fishing boat captain before the war, no formal military training. What made him dangerous? He understood something that coalition naval officers didn't. Stone realized that a submarine was just a torpedo with people inside. Instead of launching weapons at coalition ships, he turned his entire submarine into a weapon. Zektar stopped pacing and faced Velnoth. Stone's first attack was against the coalition cruiser Talon of Might. Instead of firing torpedoes from a distance, he surfaced his submarine directly under the cruiser and detonated his entire torpedo room. He destroyed his own vessel, destroyed his own vessel and the cruiser. 3,000 coalition sailors died because one human captain refused to fight a conventional battle. Zektar's voice was getting louder. But that's not the worst part. What's the worst part? Before Stone died, he broadcast a message on all coalition frequencies. Every ship in the fleet heard him laughing as his submarine exploded. Laughing, Commander. He was enjoying his own death, as long as he could take us with him. How did other submarine commanders react? They started copying Stone's tactics. Collins had turned the entire human submarine fleet into guided missiles with human crews. They would surface in the middle of coalition formations, ram our ships, board our vessels, through underwater airlocks. Anything to cause maximum damage before dying. Velnoth set down his pen. What was the psychological impact? Coalition naval crews started refusing to enter Earth's oceans. They knew that every time they went underwater, human submarines were hunting them, not trying to sink them quickly and cleanly, but trying to ram them, board them, drag them down into the deep water. How many ships did the coalition lose? In 3 months, Collins's submarine fleet destroyed 47 major vessels and damaged hundreds more. The humans lost nearly their entire submarine force, but they made Earth's oceans impassable for coalition ships. Zektar sat back down and leaned forward. But the submarines were just the beginning. Collins had a bigger plan. What plan? He realized that the coalition was planning orbital bombardment of human cities. Our ships had to get into position above Earth's major population centers to launch the attack. Collins was waiting for us. With what? With every human ship that could still fly, every submarine that could surface, every aircraft that could carry weapons. Collins had coordinated a planet-wide defense network using civilian vessels, military ships, and improvised weapons. How effective was this network? When Operation Final Strike began, Collins launched simultaneous attacks on every coalition vessel in Earth's solar system. But these weren't normal military attacks. Zektar's hands were shaking again. Collins had convinced thousands of human civilians to volunteer for suicide missions. Cargo ships loaded with explosives, passenger liners converted into rams, private yachts carrying homemade bombs. They came at our fleet from every direction at once. Civilian vessels attacking military ships, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Every human with access to a spacecraft had volunteered to die fighting the coalition fleet. Zektar's voice cracked. We were shooting down school buses that had been converted into fighters, destroying luxury cruise ships that were trying to ram our dreadnoughts. How did coalition crews respond? They broke, completely broke. Our gunners were crying as they fired on human civilian ships. Our captains were refusing orders to target obvious non-combatants. Some coalition vessels just stopped fighting altogether. But the human civilians kept attacking? They kept attacking until they were all dead. Every single human vessel was destroyed, but they took 60 coalition ships with them. 60 military vessels destroyed by civilians who had no military training. Velnoth looked at his notes in disbelief. How is that possible? Because the humans didn't care about military doctrine or proper tactics or preserving their forces. They cared about killing as many coalition soldiers as possible before they died. Zektar stood up again. Collins broadcast a message during the battle that every coalition officer will remember forever. What did he say? He said, "You wanted to see how humans fight for their home? Congratulations, you're about to find out." Then he laughed while thousands of human civilians were dying around him. What happened to Collins? He survived the battle. His command ship was one of the few human vessels that wasn't destroyed. After the fighting ended, he sent one final message to the Coalition fleet. "What message?" He said, "Today you learned what happens when you threaten human civilians. Tomorrow we'll show you what happens when humans go hunting." Then his ship disappeared into the outer solar system. Zektar walked to the wall and pressed his forehead against it. That night, every Coalition ship in Earth's solar system received the same transmission. Thousands of human voices singing together, harmonizing across every communication channel. What were they singing? Battle hymns, victory songs, funeral dirges for their dead, but also promises. Promises that they would hunt down every Coalition soldier in the galaxy. Promises that they would never stop fighting, never surrender, never forgive. How did this affect Coalition morale? It destroyed Coalition morale. Our soldiers realized that they weren't just fighting a military force. They were fighting an entire species that had chosen total war. Every human civilian was a potential combatant. Every human child was being trained to kill Coalition soldiers. Every human settlement was a fortress. When did High Command realize the war was unwinnable? 3 days after Collins' battle, when human attack ships appeared in Coalition space for the first time, not in Earth's solar system, not defending human worlds, but attacking Coalition home systems. Velnoth looked up sharply. Humans attacking Coalition territory? Small raiding forces, maybe 5 or 6 ships each. They hit supply depots, communication stations, isolated outposts. Nothing strategically important, but the psychological impact was enormous. Why? Because it proved that humans could strike anywhere, anytime. Coalition citizens realized that Earth's defenders had become Earth's avengers. The war had spread beyond human space. How did Coalition civilians react? Panic. Complete panic. Entire star systems demanded military protection from human raiders. Our fleet was spread so thin trying to defend Coalition territory that we couldn't maintain offensive operations against Earth. Zektar turned around to face Velnoth. But the worst part was the messages the human raiders left behind. What? Messages? At every site they attacked, the humans left the same thing. Children's drawings, pictures of human families standing over dead Coalition soldiers, pictures of Earth surrounded by burning alien ships, pictures of human children playing with Coalition skulls. The interrogation room was silent except for the quiet hum of the recording device. Commander Velnoth sat across from Zektar, both of them looking older than they had 5 days ago. A stack of completed reports lay on the table between them. "This is our final session, Sergeant," Velnoth said quietly. "Tell me about the Coalition's decision to withdraw from human space." Zektar nodded slowly. He had been expecting this moment, but that didn't make it easier. The decision came after High Admiral Kethvar received a transmission from Earth, a message that changed everything. What kind of message? A formal communication from the human government, not a surrender offer, not a peace proposal. It was something else entirely. Zektar's voice was steady now, as if he had finally found peace with his memories. The message was delivered by General Nathan Brooks, the human military representative. What did General Brooks say? He said, "Greetings to the Galactic Coalition. We understand you have been studying our species during this conflict. We thought you might be interested in some additional information about humanity." Velnoth wrote, carefully, "What kind of information?" "A complete history of human warfare. Every major conflict in their recorded history, every military innovation, every tactical development." Zektar leaned back in his chair. "General Brooks sent us 12,000 years of human military records." 12,000 years? Humans have been fighting wars since before they discovered agriculture, before they built cities, before they developed writing, before they learned to work metal. They have never known peace, Commander, not once in their entire existence. Velnoth looked up from his notes. "That's impossible." No species can survive constant warfare. That's what we thought too. But the humans proved us wrong. Zektar stood up and walked to the wall. Brooks explained that war isn't something humans do. War is what humans are. Explain. Every other species in the galaxy developed warfare as a tool for acquiring resources or territory. Humans developed warfare as a method of evolution. They didn't just fight for land or food or mates. They fought to determine which groups would survive and which would die. Natural selection through combat? More than that. Cultural selection through combat. Human tribes that were better at warfare survived and had children. Human tribes that were peaceful were conquered and disappeared. Over thousands of generations, humans bred themselves to be warriors. Zektar turned to face Velnoth. Do you know what the longest period of peace in human history was? How long? 37 years. In 12,000 years of recorded history, the longest time humans went without fighting a major war was 37 years. And during that time, they were preparing for the next war. What did they do during peacetime? They studied previous wars, developed new weapons, trained their children to fight, and looked for new enemies to battle. Humans don't know how to exist without conflict. They need war the way other species need food or water. Velnoth set down his pen. This was in the message from General Brooks? All of it. Plus detailed analysis of human military doctrine, psychological profiles of human soldiers, and strategic assessments of human capabilities. Zektar began pacing again. But the most important part was Brooks' conclusion. What conclusion? He said that everything the coalition had seen so far was humans fighting defensively, protecting their homes, defending their families, reacting to coalition aggression. He said we hadn't seen what humans were capable of when they went on the attack, a threat, a promise. Brooks said that if the coalition continued the war, humans would stop defending and start conquering. He said we had two choices: withdraw from human space immediately, or face the full military might of a species that had spent 12,000 years perfecting the art of war. How did High Command respond? High Admiral Kethvar called an emergency session of the War Council. Every senior coalition officer, every military strategist, every xenoanthropologist in the fleet. Zektar stopped pacing. They spent 3 days analyzing Brooks's data. What did they discover? They discovered that humans had been holding back during our war. Everything we had seen, all the tactics that had broken coalition morale, all the strategies that had cost us hundreds of ships and thousands of soldiers, that was humans fighting with restraint. Velnoth looked confused. Restraint? Humans had been trying to minimize their own casualties while maximizing ours. They were fighting a defensive war with limited resources against a superior enemy. But their history showed what they could do with unlimited resources and aggressive intentions. Such as, human military history includes something called total war. The complete mobilization of an entire civilization for the purpose of destroying an enemy. Every human, every resource, every piece of technology dedicated to warfare until the enemy is completely eliminated. Zektar sat back down. The coalition analysts realized that humans had never used total war tactics against us. They had been fighting to defend their territory, not to destroy the coalition entirely. What would human total war look like? According to their historical records, it would mean the conversion of their entire civilization into a weapon. Every human world becomes a military base. Every human citizen becomes a soldier. Every human resource is directed toward building weapons and ships and bombs. That seems inefficient. It's not about efficiency, Commander. It's about complete victory. Human total war doesn't end when the enemy surrenders. It ends when the enemy no longer exists as a threat. Velnoth wrote frantically. General Brooks threatened to exterminate the coalition? He didn't threaten anything. He simply explained what would happen if the war continued. He said that humans had been fighting to protect their homes, but if necessary, they would fight to eliminate the coalition entirely. How could they eliminate a galactic civilization? The same way they had eliminated hundreds of human civilizations throughout their history. Systematic conquest. total destruction of enemy military forces, complete occupation of enemy territory, and integration of survivors into human culture. Zektar's voice got quieter. Brooke sent detailed records of human campaigns against other human nations, wars that lasted for decades, conflicts that killed millions, campaigns that completely erased enemy civilizations from existence. Humans, fighting other humans. That's the most terrifying part, Commander. Everything humans had done to coalition forces they had been doing to each other for thousands of years. The tactics that broke our soldiers' minds, the strategies that destroyed our morale, the weapons that seemed impossible to counter. All of that was standard human warfare. They had been practicing on each other for 12,000 years. Every generation of humans had learned warfare by fighting other humans. Every military innovation had been tested in human versus human combat. Every psychological weapon had been perfected through human civil wars. Belnoth stopped writing. When did High Command decide to withdraw? The decision came when General Brooks sent his final message. A simple statement that convinced the War Council that continuing the fight was impossible. What did he say? You have seen what we do to defend our worlds. Would you like to see what we do when we attack yours? The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Belnoth spoke. That was enough to end the war. That, combined with the intelligence reports about human capabilities, convinced High Admiral Kethvar that the coalition faced extinction if the war continued. Why? Because humans would never stop fighting. Even if the coalition destroyed Earth, even if we killed 90% of their population, the survivors would spend the rest of their lives hunting down coalition citizens for revenge. Zektar stood up and walked to the door. But more importantly, the analysts realized that fighting humans was teaching them how to fight the coalition. Every battle made them better at killing us. Every engagement taught them our weaknesses. They were learning. They were evolving. In real time, during combat, humans were adapting their tactics to defeat coalition forces more effectively. By the end of the war, human fighters were better at anti-coalition warfare than coalition forces were at anti-human warfare. How is that possible? Because humans learn faster when they're fighting for survival, because they innovate under pressure, because they get stronger when they're threatened with extinction. Zektar paused with his hand on the door. The Coalition War Council realized that continuing the fight would only make humans more dangerous. So they chose withdrawal. They chose survival. High Command concluded that humans represented an existential threat to coalition civilization. Not just military defeat, but complete cultural destruction. In what way? Humans don't just conquer territory, Commander. They conquer ideas. Their way of thinking about war, their approach to conflict, their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory, all of that spreads to other species. Cultural contamination, cultural evolution. Any species that spent time around humans would start adopting human military doctrine. Their children would grow up hearing human war stories. Their soldiers would start using human tactics. Zektar opened the door but didn't leave. The coalition withdrew because they realized that humans weren't just another species to be conquered. They were a military philosophy made flesh, a way of thinking about war that could infect the entire galaxy.